read Megan up there.
Pardon?
I only read Megan.
I think they're stacked, right? Megan and Leslie?
Yeah, there. Oh, okay.
Is Leslie coming?
She's online.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's the problem I had. I only read one name, but they say they've got them stacked. Good evening and welcome to the Kent School Board special meeting of March 15th, where our focus is a work session on the 24 budget and policy work session. This is held in public to comply with the Open Public Meetings Act. The purpose of this meeting is a work session. And we'll have the finance director, Ben Rarick, with us. Director Bento is absent and excused from this meeting as he's actually at work elsewhere. And Director Hamada is currently on Zoom, and Director Margell is also on Zoom, but will be arriving shortly. But I still have to call roll, so here's real tough. Vice President Fair.
Present.
And I'm present. And the Zoom people are already checked in, so there's 4 of us. All right, I'm now going to call on Superintendent Vela for introductions.
Thank you, President Clark, members of the board. I'd like to call on Mr. Ben Rarick, our Associate Superintendent of Finance, and invite him to begin our budget discussion for the evening. Mr. Rarick.
Good evening, board members. 2 in person, 2 virtual, which will change the dynamic just a little bit, but I think you said that 1 board member's on their way.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so of course I know you know this, but maybe for the benefit for folks that are watching, we enjoyed a robust work session exactly 1 week ago on March 8th, which was work session number 1 of the 2023-24 budget development process. What is typical of that work session is kind of some foundational learning about the budget process for board members who are relatively new, and kind of setting out some fundamental challenges as it relates to the enrollment of the district and the long-range fiscal health of the district, and actions we may or may not have to take in the short and long term to ensure our fiscal health. Those materials, of course, are available on the website for both the board members and those that may be watching. What I wanted to share prior to our discussion tonight is that we've actually, as I know the board has given a lot of thought and effort to its efforts to become a board of distinction and to kind of consider the standards of boards of distinction, so have the staff thought about how we can make this a budget process of distinction, actually document it, and share it in ways where we could say to other districts, this is a model way that you should consider. And one of the things that districts struggle the most with is the sort of interplay between the technical budget development and the policy work, right? And the best way to frame budget conversations with their boards of governance. And so we're venturing in that space again tonight and trying to build a best practice. So that's the thing I wanted to tell you, is that we're documenting this as we go, and we're trying to literally build something that other districts can emulate, because this is a frequently asked question, how to do this right and do it well. And so in structuring today's conversation, I believe every board member received a document, perhaps came to you in email, that structured some foundational questions, and they are, given all that was presented to you on the 8th, what are some fundamental hopes that you have for the budget development process? I think I asked for 3, but it could be 2, it could be 7, you know, I mean, it's just a way of limiting and structuring your thoughts about it. And then what are some concerns or fears that you have about the budget development process as well? This is not a workshop for staff to present to you. This is a workshop for the board to have some dialogue amongst themselves and with the superintendent. I'm happy to be able to answer questions, and I will be here feverishly taking notes. But this really is, in fact, we considered creating a round table to foster the round table conversation, but then the virtual aspect of this kind of
Made it.
changed that a little bit. But just so you kind of get the sense of the sentiment of it and the intent. So with that, Mr. Superintendent, I would open the floor to questions. I don't know in what order, but the staff would be interested in hearing and documenting, like, from what the board heard last week, what comes to mind in terms of their aspirations and concerns for this budget process.
All right. May I actually get this loaded?
Yep. Carolyn, if you come on up and, yeah.
Budget workshops, Word document.
Oh, okay.
So we'll pause while we're getting that loaded for President Clark,
Yes.
for Director Margell and Director Hamada. President Clark has a visual that he wanted it loaded.
Right.
And so I wanted just to pick up on the question that Mr. Rarick just posed, and nothing more to say or to add, President Clark, other than this isn't just a discussion, a conversation, using the hopes/concerns, fears that we hope to discuss here, but really ground ourselves with what the work that we've not just started last week, but that we've been doing over the last year and a half related to budgeting for this upcoming fiscal year and beyond. And then with that, hoping that the board also takes into consideration the goal setting that we've done together as a board, and how we're really focused on championing the different goals and those pieces. But now we are at a place which we would be each year in looking at how to prioritize our budget and moving forward. And I believe it was Vice President Farrell last week that shared, correct me if I'm wrong,
Right.
that the values of a district can be seen through the budgeting and where we budget and what we believe is important. And so I say that in that I appreciated that comment, and I've also appreciated the work the board has done as a whole to this point as we engage in this conversation. So I'll turn it over to President Clark on how we might want to proceed with the discussion this evening.
Okay, so I took mine straight off of the resolution that's coming up on board functions. And the first statement in that grouping was a responsible school district governance. Now, that means that we as a board are trying to assist along with the superintendent to clearly fulfill legal obligations. And from that standpoint, there are three subsets that I think sit underneath that. So the first question I'm asking is, do we have a central office staff to fulfill all accountability to state and federal revenue sources? Now, that's not a rhetorical question. That very simply is a statement of fact. If you don't have the paper trail, you lose the money. And so from that standpoint, one of the things that's lost in the public observance of what we're trying to do is that we have multiple revenue sources, but anything that's a government agency has strings attached. And so the problem with it is do we have the staff to continue keeping that flow of paperwork normalized? Now, hidden underneath that also is, do we have the technical staff to ensure sustainable district-wide digital platforms? Now, what I'm trying to get at there is, I was here present when the school board was looking at that financial disaster of 2008, 2009, And the beginning discussions facing that massive loss of federal and state money literally had the IT director questioning whether he could fully staff the call-in process for people having trouble with internet connections. So literally, you as a classroom teacher are going forward with your lesson, boom, some technical glitch occurs, you call a central office, and they don't have anybody present to answer the phone. Now, that to me, of course, is to say you're not fulfilling a basic, modern question. But the bottom line is, like everything else, it's manpower. All right, and then the other thing that's hit, before I get to that, there's another group that I tied to the very first one, and that's human resources. And the problem with human resources is we had an ugly failure that followed that financial disaster. We now have gone back and went through an audit process. We now are on our way to a healthy process. Are we going to turn right around and facing these number crunches and destroy what we've just fulfilled? Because there's multiple traps in that, not the least of which is benefits, retirements, leaves. All of those things are critical to the mental health of our staff. And that's certified staff, it's, all of our folks that stand behind, it's everything from nurses to physical therapists to school psychologists to fill in the blank. But the bottom line is you have to have those processes secure. Otherwise, what starts to happen, and did happen, is you suddenly put people on hold. And people with family problems or medical emergencies or fill in the blank, taking care of their aging parents, boom, suddenly they're on hold. And that's the wrong answer. It's just not appropriate. All right, another function was creating conditions district-wide for student and staff success. And right up front, I'm declaring the hugest priority that we have is our classrooms being successful, and tied to that is class size and the impacts for the success of staff. And then holding the district, can I get that rotated down? Thank you. Holding the district accountable for student learning. Do we have staff to support measures of student learning across all buildings and, of course, our virtual and tech academies? And the point behind that is that's not a simple question. It's not even a question simply of class size. It's about appropriate staffing to run the program that you're committed to. And so all of these are considerations, I think, that have to be up front. As soon as you start dealing with, I don't know, a question of equity, boom, go back through that and look at what you hit. So I'm just trying to put some, I don't want to call them pathways because that's not appropriate, but some categories, if you will, that we have to be assured that we are functional. It's not going to be a glorified program, and we recognize that. But it does ask the question, as you start to, eventually it becomes a numbers game, and when you start to get into that, we traditionally have always taken the classroom comes first. But there are support services that are critical for morale. And I'm here to tell you, people start looking for another job. It's not that any other district isn't going to be in trouble, because they are, but the question I'm asking here is, can we maintain a functioning level that's going to support the basic program we're trying to offer? All right, comments from folks.
Just a check, President Clark. Directors Margell and Hamada, can you see the screen, or is that something that, just double checking?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay.
I am highlighting as it goes.
Thank
I
you.
can see it.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure. President Clark.
All right, comments? Anybody?
Leslie or Hamada, do you guys have anything?
Leslie or Megan?
Well, first of all, I mean, I understand what you went through there, President Clark. That's kind of been a basic of anything. I thought, I came with some specifics that I'm seeing out of all that fall into those categories on hopes and where I want to go with the budget. I mean, is this the particular time we want to talk about that? We want to bring go forth those things that we think are our hopes or wants for the budget. Are we at that point, or are we discussing all those other things?
Well, I'll come back to you directly for your own proposals. I'm just asking the question on what I have just said to this point.
Well, I mean, all of that to me is pretty much of a given, so whatever.
Okay?
I guess I would have one comment. Could you scroll up to the top one? And I absolutely hear you. Like Leslie said, a lot of this seems kind of fundamental, right? And that's where we're at. But I think that there is something that is potentially missed here, and I might be wrong, but we know that there are other funding sources, grants, and additional dollars out there. And what I would want to make sure also is you specify state and federal revenue sources. I also feel that there are some opportunities that might be missed because we don't have the staffing to be able to look for those additional revenue sources. And I would want to make sure that we're not cutting off our nose to spite our face on that one.
All right, Ben, I have a question for you on that then. The first part of that is, I believe that most of our grants are actually coming from state or federal sources, but I'm sure there are exceptions. Can you think of any that we're currently involved with?
Sure, yeah, I would say the larger grants tend to be either directly from the state or federal government or pass-throughs, where maybe the county has received a large grant and then we're like a sub-award. But, depending on the specific time, we might have a Gates Foundation grant. There might be various foundation grants. Those tend to be kind of orders of magnitude smaller, but they're nevertheless significant, and we appreciate them. I'm not trying, just putting them in context. Off the top of my head, we have some smaller niche grants. I think we have one for some after-school programming, if I'm looking for Randy. Is Randy here?
I can
Schools out.
definitely address those.
Right.
There are both state and federal funds
Right.
that can address what's termed in the I-grants as students not meeting standard.
Okay.
In other words, what does the data show? And these dollars are, quote, restricted, if you will, or should be guided toward that end, all right? The other piece about grants, Director Margell, I appreciate that question. There are a number of grants, and just for the full board to consider is that a lot of those smaller grants are not ongoing. They are one time. And the budget that we're talking about right now is really general fund and revenues that are coming in, as you heard in the last session, or the last meeting we were in, revenues.
Right.
Right? Mr. Eric went through enrollment, a number of other things, and that's really what we're talking about. So given that, because I would also say included with the larger pieces, we also have levy funding that comes in that's not guaranteed or dollars that are always coming through. So just wanted to frame that, our conversation around those. Yeah, so I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and to that point, like if to the extent that we do have a grant that's non-reoccurring or niche or
specific.
time limited, then that means the associated expenses are also. So you might have a consultant that's with us for 6 months, but, you're not
Yeah.
necessarily.
Thank you, Mr. Rick.
All right. Waller?
I mean, what you wrote there, I mean, those are things that we definitely have to have in order to us to function as school district. For example, when you said something like the fact that when the last time there was a financial issue with the district, there was no place where, teacher who has technical issue can call in and actually get help. We do have that now. As I remember, there was a presentation for us to receive from, I believe, last year or sometime, that they were telling us there's a ticketing system that people can call in and people can get. So that's what in general, yes, we definitely need to have where there is a help available for teachers to be able to pick up the phone and say, I'm having an issue with connecting to the Promethean board or something to that effect, then somebody's on there automatically can help so that they can continue teaching. I mean, the things that are there, I agree with you. In every one of them is something that we really need to have. But when I was looking at it was when the question was, what are your hopes and your concerns? So I start writing in that sense of how can we show our value in the budget so that the budget is reflection of what we really care about. So I start in that sense. So that's what I would add.
Okay, so what I'm going to do to keep moving on here, Leslie, did you have a pros and cons or wish list, whatever?
Yeah, but I do want to make a comment that on all of these points, of course, there are things that we need to be looking at, but I was under the assumption that we probably have, and I'm sure our superintendent has what we call a bare bone budget, what we need to function, and what would be the number that would be the exemplary. And I'd always be interested in seeing that, because unless you're internally working with this every day, you can't answer these questions or adequately know what's going on. So it would be good to, I think what the problem that we're facing is that we're going to have a lot of dollars that have really helped us go away here, and we need to be prepared for that. And as I understand, we are in the process of preparing for that. So, but still, it's taken me a while to get into a lot of the ins and outs of this job, but I have 3 hopes, if you want me, or desires that I think would be the best place for the budget to be geared toward. If you want to start on that.
Yes, sure.
I could do that. Well, first of all, what I'm really seeing and what I'm learning, and I've been going to a lot of additional kind of talks and stuff, and it appears that even though I've heard this over and over again, I've heard about the pipeline to prison and being able to learn by 3rd grade to read and all that, and it's statistically how they, build prisons on how many of our kids are failing or not doing in reading. I think I would want our budget to reflect and show that we are spending a large amount of money, probably a best practices on our littles, meaning K through 3, our younger children, so we can make sure all of our children that are, whatever area they're coming in from, special education, English language learners, new to the country, immigrants or refugees, whatever, those smaller children come in with whatever they have into our system, get the very best in the lowest class size that we can possibly do to get teacher ratio, para, whatever they need in that area from K through 3. Because I think it takes a while for that to proliferate throughout the whole system. But once you get that perfected so they can read, even it's, and I always thought before math and reading were on the same level, but going to some of these seminars and saying they can't even get their math instructions right because they can't read right. So that would be a top priority to me, to have enough staff in our K through 3 and the minimum number that we can possibly have and support in our budget to make that happen. That's number one. And maybe somebody else wants to go next.
All right, Megan, do you have one?
Can I give my 3?
Go for it.
Okay. So thank you, Leslie. I think that I appreciate you teeing this off. My 3 hopes are, one, about tiered support and making sure that we're having the right level of education to best support those students. And I think that this actually goes a lot with Director Hamada's in K3, that right now we only offer Odyssey starting in the 3rd grade. And you will look statewide, most of those programs start in 1st or 2nd grade, especially at larger districts. I truly believe that that is a tiered support type of program that needs to be addressed. I also look at graduation rates and feeling that you are accepted and you have your people, especially in high school, is so important. And then having those resources for help. It doesn't matter if you have them if you can't get kids home. And so having activity buses at our middle schools and our high schools would be a priority for me. And then the last one, I'm going to say, I just see that impact of not having this. And as much as we can prepare students for their future success, we will close every door for them if they don't understand how to use their finances. And financial education, for me, is just so incredibly important. If you talk to adults and parents right now, if they could give any advice to their kids, it usually is around money. More divorces are caused because of money.
Yeah.
And I mean, it truly is.
True.
It is
really true.
the impact on our society for not understanding how to balance your checking account. Yes, you might not have a checkbook anymore, that's okay, but you still need to know how to balance your account. What credit looks like, especially when we're talking about college debt. Our kids have to have financial education. Those would be my hopes and dreams for our budget.
Our budget to reflect.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Any
you.
comments on Megan's? Going once,
Going
going
twice.
twice.
No.
All right, Vice President Farah.
Just for the notes, can I ask a clarifying question on that one?
Right,
You bet.
right.
Come to the,
We're talking about the-
Ben, can you come to the podium? Thank you.
We should have had a round table.
Yeah, that was,
Yeah.
that was the plan. But
That was-
when you were talking about activity buses, did I hear
Yes.
you say activity buses at middle school and high school? Is that what I just want to make sure I got it down correctly.
Middle school and high school, and I know that the budget's going to determine the number of days that we're able to have. But I guess on kind of and I think this was addressed in President Clark's message, equity is a viewpoint that we really need to look at within the district. But particularly in the middle schools and the high schools.
Okay, I just want to make sure I got it right. Thanks.
Right, right.
And then just to follow up to
Right.
that,
Yes,
Dr.
please.
Margill, you started that with grad rate,
Yep,
and I didn't want to link it. I put whole child here in that the activities buses conversation, back to President Clark's, that options, opportunities are well-rounded, but I also noted grad rate that you had in there. And can you elaborate a little bit on that? Is that getting
Yeah.
our kids to the finishing line regardless of what situation they're in?
depending on, regardless of what situation that they're in, that both it's either finding that extra enrichment or that extra help that they can with their classes instead of just giving up, that there's an extra hand to help them out. It's also maybe just finding that activity or that person that they don't feel alone. I also have a very passionate belief about activity buses, because sometimes home isn't always a safe place to be.
Right.
And the place where the kid can be able to stay and feel successful and have somewhere that they can call their own and own whatever program or help or whatever it is, and maybe they're not getting that at home or they're having something terrible at home. I want them to have school be their safe place to go, and getting them home safely is part of that.
Thank you for that. I didn't want to assume that, but
Yep.
I
No,
knew,
absolutely.
because the whole child really is about looking at all those pieces.
Yep.
And helping them get to the finish line, if you will, sometimes requires us to create alternative environments.
Right.
As we heard last week about a student that said, boy, the KLA, I believe, or it was KBA, that if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't, and so I put that in that same realm, that I also had another environment that I was able to excel in, at the same time being able to recoup the credit retrieval process that I might need to get on one of the activity buses to be able to do that, or I might be able to get online to be able to get that additional support.
Yep,
Thank you.
absolutely.
And that, yeah, that makes sense, because even the kids said that, you know, they said if it wasn't VA, they would not be able to graduate. I agree.
All right, and do you have it now?
Oh, I have three, but I wanted to also give Director Hamada if she wants to.
Leslie, did you have others?
Yes, obviously, this is one that unfortunately we have to think about, and is, in order to have our kids there to be able to learn and stuff, I want to make sure that every one of our schools has as much protection from anything, all the latest equipment and cameras and everything else, and have it equal across all the schools, so in this time that we can do everything possible to keep our kids safe. Because we can't keep them safe, they'll never have a chance to learn. I hate to have that as one of them, but that's one of them.
It's basic.
And under the, building that, the first one I mentioned, I didn't want to go on and on, but there's probably 3 bullet points under that, wanting to build on the reading and keeping the staff. Is we have to have the dollars for professional development for that K-3 learning to be successful. We have to have the very best model and the very best curriculum, and some of the stuff that's coming out that I'm showing and learning about, we really better have that type of curriculum and professional development and emphasis on the way to teach reading is being done in a correct manner. So all of those go under one. And the last hope is, and of course, we have to maintain somehow a fiscally balanced budget that reflects a 5-year plan for stability. And however you do that, I mean, yesterday when I was at Olympia, I was quite amazed at what happened. From the time I got there to the time I had to testify, it was interesting how they changed all the criteria, what I could say, what I could do, and I had 1 minute and 50 seconds to say a whole lot, and then they didn't want you to talk about money, and on and on. So dealing with entities in the state and the feds is a nightmare. That's all I'm going to say. And as far as getting more, anything we can get out of them, we need to be advocating down there for everything we can get. Superintendent of Seattle Schools testified right next to me yesterday, and he and I looked at each other for what was going on in that committee and just shook our heads. That's all I'm going to say. It was just very interesting to see that we were given very little time. We couldn't talk about money, which was, supporting Senate Bill 5311, and how, all of these things we have to take in. So we have to be on, to get to the bottom line here, we need to be our own best stewards and plan fiscally as much as humanly possible. And that's why I'm always asking Mr. Rarick about where we're at and where we're going, and obviously, we know we're gonna have less money, so we're going to have, but I'd like to see in a 5-year plan how we can do that. And then, of course, under my fears comes some of the reasons why that could be a problem. And that's my third priority. Maintaining a fiscally balanced budget with a 5-year plan focus for stability.
And if I may, President Clark.
Yep.
Director Amata, thank you for that, to making sure that our community, just to clarify, you mentioned, you said protection, I wrote safety resources. We've heard a number of presentations over the year on types of things that our school district and our teams have been doing around that. So I wrote resources, safety resources to keep our students and staff safe. Would that be fair?
Oh, yes.
Okay, thank you. And then the other one was, I just wanted to make sure, you mentioned professional development, the type of model and curriculum. I took that as curriculum resources that include best we know practices that hits your first one, which is K-3 literacy, which I thank you for bringing that up, helping to support our kids and keeping that as a priority of ours. It's important for our kids to be able to read. And then the final one, I won't say it, you said it well, making sure we're fiscally stable and making sure that we have a balanced budget and a 5-year plan to making sure we sustain our fiscal health. So I just wanted to verbalize that, and thank you.
All right, Wally?
Okay, so I have 3 wishes. When we have this, wishes, it is not, we're not aware of the fact that our funding comes from the state. And there is certain amount of money they allocate for us, and that's all we've got. And so, yes, we will say these things because, for me, when I said that last week, that our budget shows our value, it really is a very, something that we always show. But however little we have, is that how we spend it is what we show our value is. So that I wanted to say, making sure that we strengthen, develop, and make sure that we make it a very full-fledged program is our dual language program. Because in my opinion, that builds our kids from kindergarten. It does make someone who speaks multiple languages, I can tell you it helps the kids' ability to grow and become successful in their life at later years. Because we say that kids take what they call foreign language. It's only 1 course or 2 courses of Spanish in high school, and that does not help at all. So starting from young age and developing that program, it is very crucial, because I remember visiting Neely O'Brien and seeing kids from parts of Africa who speak their own language at home come to Neely O'Brien and learn Spanish, and they're speaking English. So right there, they have 3 different languages that they speak. Some of them speak 4 languages. So for us to develop that is one of the things that I really want us, because it'll take tremendous amount of funding to do that. So we have to really look at where we can afford to make changes so that we can fully develop that program. The second one I want to talk about, and one of my wishes again is having the ability for principals to engage families. What do I mean by that? A lot of times, the principals will have parent-teacher conferences, but I don't think that is enough. I think if we can find some kind of funding for the principals to bring in families to come into the school and actually feel comfortable that school that their kids are going to, and understand that they are the advocate for their child's education, and that their participation means something that will help out in a way where that the families are engaged so that they will know. Because if you look at, for example, right now, the PTAs mostly are white families because they know the system, and they don't really know. Most of the parents of color don't really think they should participate. So that will help bring in them to be more engaged so that they can participate in the PTA, so that they can be part of making sure that, because if you look at some of the schools that have programs that the PTA funds, it comes from parents who really are part of the school and understand this is something that they should participate in. And I believe that with having this very diverse district that we have, we should bring along those families that are not, how do I say, traditionally, who take part of the education system.
If I can, I would like to insert in that. The school improvement plans obviously have the principals looking at the specific makeup of their buildings. And in so doing, that is basically about
Exactly.
contact, and I would hate to see that lost.
Yeah.
And I know it requires support.
Yeah, absolutely,
Right,
President
right.
Clark, and back to Vice President Farah.
Yes.
Thank you for saying that. What I noted, and I was just going to ask if I could clarify that piece, it's supporting principals in engaging families whose first language at home is not English. And as you know, we have over 130 languages.
Right.
And you mentioned, I'll get back to dual language in a second.
Right.
But further in that, to clarify, it is funding to support the principals and schools on being able to engage them with the school.
Right.
And I wrote the word navigate.
Navigate,
Being
yes.
able to navigate school, even though their language may not be English, that is their home language.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And to President Clark's point, yes, school improvement planning process actually requires
Right.
family engagement as a focus,
Oh.
and their school improvement planning process need to include that in it. But what I hear you saying is there's more to this than that. How do I, as a family, feel comfortable when I approach the office, when I approach a concern, potentially,
Right.
and I'm not able to communicate?
Right.
And that's one of the reasons that Director Hamada, you know well, Representative Orwell, with our district had worked on a language access bill.
Right.
Which my team is taking a look at and really taking a look at some of the great things we do already provide
Right.
around digital access to interpreter systems.
Right.
So that I can have just-in-time interpreters.
Right.
We have that. That we have access to trained
Right.
interpreters within the top languages, 5 or 10, depending on the school or district.
Right.
And having, so
Right.
I put that in a large bucket, if you will, utilizing what you just shared, so.
And what I want to emphasize is that if we don't put dollar behind that, what happens is that that fiddles away. And so, again, I'm going to go back to what I said our value will show where we put our money. So whatever little that we have, if we can figure out how to make sure that principals are supported in that sense, because they're gonna have to ask teachers, other people to work overtime. Because it's gonna happen after hours. So that in itself requires some budget item to be allocated for that.
Thank you. And the other one, going back to the dual language.
Right.
Just to be clear that
Right.
it's looking at the history of the implementation of that
Right,
program, that all programs require prioritization or support in order to sustain their impact long-term.
right.
And so what I hear you is that one is a priority of yours for the board to consider.
Right,
as
to
we move
consider,
forward.
yeah, to consider.
Okay, thank you.
And my third one is STEAM. Having technical background, I can say to you that I never had to worry about finding a job. Having technical background, that is something that is always available. So developing that, our kids have, science, math, arts, and all of that, develop that part of our school programs would make our students to be able to have a flourishing career in terms of being able to graduate and then find a well-paying job. So having that program built where we can have not only in the high school but also developed in the middle schools will create that ability to make sure that, especially I would say, pushing girls to be in the engineering field would be better for our country and for our community. Most of the time that I worked at AT&T, we couldn't find female engineers, but it was also something that we need to create that from middle school or even before that. So having this STEAM program. Okay.
And if I can,
Right.
just to reinforce
Right,
what
right,
you're saying.
right.
I absolutely agree that we should be looking forward in terms of employment opportunities and the training necessary to make that more attainable for more of our students. And it would appear to be an irrelevant comment, but when you look at the investment of the big boys in artificial intelligence, and suddenly you're looking across at Microsoft and all the rest of them, and the ton of money that they're putting into it, and then you work backwards and look at introduction of robotics and that sort of engineering process, and then all of the digital education that we continue to foster and grow, I think we're giving our students a reasonable basis to have multiple opportunities when they graduate from here. And
Yeah, I would agree, President Clark, and
Right.
if I may clarify, I was able to attend the State of the City of Kent.
Yes.
And I know Director Fair was there,
Yes,
and talked
yes,
about how
absolutely.
we, Kent School District, in our
Right.
34 square miles in the city of Kent, that we have some of the largest career and technical
Absolutely.
education opportunities and partnerships. And so I heard that last night, so
Right.
I immediately thought about, and
Thank
and
you
I'll
for reminding me
connect
of that, yeah.
Director Margell's comment about, financial literacy.
Right.
And I wrote down, Director
Right.
Margell, applied
Right.
math. When we think about real-world math and applied mathematics, applied digital literacy, and a number of other pieces, we are, and I'm going to channel Director Benno,
Yeah, always, yeah.
career and technical education. Yes.
Absolutely, yeah.
But really what I'm trying to say is, we heard that last night. We hear you, Director Farah, and board. I just wanted to summarize it for our rest of our board to consider.
Thank you. I forgot about that last night. When, literally, we have the most in our area, so why not prepare our students to be able to participate in that workforce?
Yeah, a delight to see Blue Origin show up in our elementary schools.
Right.
Just,
We had, actually, one showed up at Martin Sertoon.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's correct.
okay,
I'll give it, if we don't have any other comments, I'll have our Associate Superintendent of Finance, Mr. Ben Rarick, come up and kind of summarize for us, and feel free to add anything else if you might have, Director Hamada as well. But,
Carolyn, will you flank me as I?
yeah,
But I mean,
Carolyn
what
and I were
about,
both taking notes as we.
Yeah.
what about Director Benno? Did he have,
I don't believe we received anything. I know we
And did you
reached,
have any specifics? Kim?
well, but the reality is this is the first of your workshops. so-
yeah, it's first, yeah.
nice.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay,
okay.
Mr. Rarick.
All right, I did the, I was literally, kind of taking in the moment notes, and now I'm trying to assemble the one, so, I'm gonna fumble a little bit, you'll help me through this, okay?
problem.
So, I heard, starting with Director Hamada, she started with a desire to demonstrate a focus and prioritization on K-3 literacy. And she had some specific kind of bullets about that. One was devotion of kind of best practice curriculum resources, whether that we were providing the right professional development for the staff to be able to kind of achieve a best practice space in K-3 literacy. And I heard the phrase, and I wrote this down, the best we know practices is a key phrase that I heard. I don't remember who said it, but it was in the context of that K-3 literacy piece. I also heard Director Mata talk about protection of kids being a very high priority. I was assuming, I hope she's still on the line, but I was assuming that wasn't necessarily specifically a K-3 point of emphasis, but more generalized. She emphasized a discussion about having the necessary equipment and cameras to execute on best practice security. And then she talked about a 5-year plan for stability, which resonated with me.
I also had her add in the reading process support for special ed and
Okay.
refugees.
Okay.
Well, and I think I want to add to that, I mean, it just goes with me with helping every child to the maximum, but the equity piece is strong. When you look at the stats, there's quite a gap between certain communities in our reading scores. And yes, we had some scores go down during the pandemic, but the deviation between certain races and other races in their reading scores went down with the same percentage as it had maintained all along. Not showing you that somewhere along the line, we're not reaching all kids in all categories. That somehow or other, we have to do better at that. It definitely has to have an equity piece to it. That
Yeah,
that means that doesn't just, as President Clark said, that doesn't just mean race. That means that can mean disabilities of all nature, and creed and color and all that. Yeah.
Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, equity and access and supporting students in need. I'd also link it to what Director Margell mentioned earlier. I think you started with tiered, that tiered supports is across the board for all of our learners. I think we talked about, what about those who have met a standard? Do we provide options for them to go beyond that standard? If I remember that conversation. So it's across the board, so systems of support certainly resonate with me and the team. Mr. Eric.
Should I continue? Yep. Thank you. I appreciate that clarification, Director Amata. Director Margell, picking up on the theme of tiered supports, I think I would just be repeating what Israel was just saying, Superintendent Vela was just saying about tiered supports means that, I think you specifically referenced the Odyssey program, for example, and whether or not there is the right placement of that program vis-a-vis grades. I think the availability of grades is what you brought up. You said most of them are in first and second grade. Did I get that right?
Just statewide,
Yeah.
yes. I'd also like to make sure that we have in there, if you're going to have a program, you have to have adequate, what's the word I'm looking for? Identification of students for that program too. And making sure that we have best in class for identification.
And then you, it's just a little awkward to recap what you just said, but I'm just checking that I'm capturing this correctly. You highlighted graduation rates and talked about, okay, actually, I think I have a note here that gets into Director Farah's, because I think we were skipping around a bit, right? So the discussion about activity buses was one where you started talking about graduation rates and said that a big part of graduation rates, I think, is students feeling like they are accepted within a group in their school. You mentioned that sometimes home is not the safest place for students, and activity buses allow students to connect with activities that may be co-curricular in nature and after school. And so you thought, I think you were highlighting activity buses as a broader strategy towards strengthening graduation rates. Did I appropriately capture that?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, skipping around. And then, by the way, the staff really appreciate this because you go into it thinking you're going to hear certain things, and then you hear some of them and you hear some totally other things. So there's real value in this. We don't make assumptions about what you do or don't want. So financial literacy. So the discussion about how kids need to understand how their money works, how it affects their careers, how to manage their resources, and Superintendent Vela followed that up with making the connection with applied mathematics and the ways in which financial literacy is part of the curriculum of other classes. So that was a very interesting conversation. Did I do okay there?
Yes.
Okay.
I also feel like I can channel Joe maybe a little bit. And CTE very much has, financial literacy has a very good part. And maybe I shouldn't say I'll channel Joe. I'll just say that I'm
Channel us.
honored to sit next to him and hear his CTE too. But financial education and financial literacy,
Okay.
yes.
All right. So we're doing okay so far. Then we, I think, transitioned into a conversation about the dual language program. And you spoke about the ability of, you mentioned some specific anecdotal examples of families from Africa that come and they speak their native language, then they learn Spanish, and then they learn English, and sometimes coming out of the dual language program, they may know 3 or 4 languages, and that it was your feeling that even though it's a resource-intensive program, it also has significant benefits to the students and the families. And that is a resource-intensive program.
It is.
It definitely is.
It is, yeah.
Give me just a sec here. Then we talked about, I think we transitioned to the discussion about family engagement, which was interesting and spurred some sidebar conversation here. You were talking about the ability, and I'm not telling you what you're saying, I'm asking if this is what you said. I just didn't want you to misinterpret my, the ability for principals to engage families in their building community, particularly families who may not feel like they presumptively belong. Either there's a language barrier, maybe they're part of a minority population in that school, whatever the case may be. Are there resources available for principals to engage? You mentioned parents of color and parents who, again, may otherwise have an obstacle to participation, to, I think the phrase, cultivate their involvement. And I think it was Director Clark who was highlighting the fact that the school improvement plans in some cases specifically have strategies for that. So it would be a question of, are we implementing our plans with fidelity, and is there resource to that strategy? Did I capture that right?
Yes.
Ben, may I ask Wally a question about his last one?
Of course.
When you said dual language program, are you still intending that specifically around Spanish and English?
That's what we have right now.
That's
Yeah.
why I'm asking.
Right,
you.
right, right.
I'm
I
clarifying
mean,
with you.
the
That's-
schools that we have implemented, the dual language schools, are
So
Spanish.
continue to support within the.
Continue to support
Okay.
and build that more and more. I mean, if we could, expand that to multiple other languages, yes, but it's a really resource intensive. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Thank you, Wally.
Okay, continuing on then. So I think we just wrapped up our conversation about family engagement, and then the third one was STEAM programs and how technical backgrounds equip students to graduate and flourish in their career. And I think that Director Farrar said, if you have that technical background and training, odds are that student is not going to be having difficulty finding a job, having difficulty
Right.
thriving.
Thriving in life, yeah.
And I don't remember who made this comment, but there was a comment about particularly interesting young girls and women in engineering fields. I don't remember if that was.
That was me, yeah.
And a mention of CTE again as a cross-section of, so we've got kind of two CTE themes going here. I apologize, I got to take notes and talk at the same time here so I don't forget it.
I can't believe you did that.
And then I think that the final comment was made by the board chair in saying that, to push STEAM even further, that there are some emerging fields that are starting to shape our future society. One of them being artificial intelligence.
Right.
And, I think Director Clark mentioned specifically like robotics programs and pre-engineering programs can equip students to be able to participate in that new economy. So it's one thing to talk about the needs of now.
Right.
It's another thing to think about the needs of tomorrow vis-a-vis the training of these students.
And if I can, just to reach a little bit farther, when the business world starts to really refocus
Right.
on a particular pathway, the pressure immediately drops down for the university college system to begin to
Train that.
train. And the catch here is, when I look at Green River College, I was on the board of trustees, and I was absolutely stunned when I saw the percentage of graduates going out with four-year degrees. And at Green River, you were only permitted, I think, about 4 pathways where you could get a four-year degree. but I'm looking at the graduating class going across the stage, and 70% of them were in technology.
Wow.
And it was, of course, number one, because they had specifically targeted digital security, but the second part of it is simply the mastery of general programming and certification in those fields. And it illustrates, of course, that that's already present in our community. I mean, Green River students are coming out of this greater community. And so it behooves us, and now we go back to career and technical education, that we make linkage and expansion where possible to create more avenues. And I'm not suggesting a particular pathway. I'm just saying the likelihood that that will occur in the next year or so is overwhelming, because that's where the money is.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, President Clark, and, you know, as Mr. Eric mentioned, this is really powerful to have us, as a board superintendent governance team, to really talk about and have discussion about where we, you know, value, where our values, as we move into being fiscally stable and healthy. As you said, Director Hamada, a balanced budget and really looking at the next 5 years to stay healthy and stay strong in the future. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
And I believe we'll have more conversation.
Yeah.
But I think if, President Clark, I think that completes the first portion of our meeting. We can move into the next one.
Just before, are we kind of talking about balanced? We talked about our hopes. Are we giving our fears, the second part of our assignment next time then?
No, actually, I think we can, real quickly,
Yeah.
if you want to throw some up, go.
Go.
Balanced budget,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
District needs to practice what they preach for financial education, right? We need to have an eye on success, not just survival.
Okay.
We need to, how do we make ourselves out to be the gold standard? And just, instead of just hitting the standard. And then also a balance between people, process, and programs.
Can you give me a little thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you talked about this. Do you have to make sure you have the people to be able to do the process and the programs that you have in place. You have to, you can't just get all the new computers but not have a computer teacher.
Right.
You can't just,
Right.
you know,
Got it.
there has to be a balance between these different things and all the different ways that we look at things. So those are the things that I want to make sure when we're looking at, that we're looking at balance, we're looking at an eye on success, not just survival, and that we're looking at a balance of people, process, and
Program.
programs.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, any other comments from board?
Well, I just wanted to add, one of my concerns is the lack of funding for special ed from the
Yes.
state.
Yeah.
Just saying, because
All right,
we know how much we need. I just wanted to also add, one of the concerns I have is, how do we make sure that we do the step down in a more of, have, with heart, so that when we're stepping down and we know that the ratio from teacher to student, after we lose ESSER, we're gonna have to figure out how to make sure that we do that step down. So what kind of step down we're gonna take will require, what are the budgeting, how are we gonna do that instead of taking, do we take a small step or do we take a steep step, or how does that happen? So those are the two things I wanted to put that quickly.
all right. With that, I'm going to suggest we move on to the policy work session, and I'll turn it over to Superintendent Bello.
Thank you, President Clark, and thank you to our board for another robust discussion and our continuation with our budget process moving into 23-24 and beyond. I'd like to invite Ms. Holly up to get us started with the policies that are noted, and she will take it from here.
Evening, President Clark, members of the board, Superintendent Vella, and Ms. Curry. Give me just 1 second to pull up my PowerPoint.
Revised protocol guidelines is what's going to show up first.
First, okay.
Okay, as we've done in the past couple work sessions, I'll move through the PowerPoint rather quickly. You have it in front of you, and I apologize, Director Hamada, that you don't have it, but it is online if you're able to access it, and it in your policy work folder as well. We are going to take a look at the revised protocol guidelines. Policy 1210, annual organizational meeting. These are all first reading, by the way. Policy 1410, executive or closed sessions. Policy 1810, annual governance goals and objectives. Policy 1822, training and professional development for board members. And should any of these move forward, they will show on the April 26th regular meeting agenda. We only have one regular meeting in April. Okay. The first thing we are going to look at is the revised protocol guideline, the update of that. The protocol is being updated to reflect a change in board membership and a change from superintendent from interim to continual. Item number 4 simply clarifies that if the vote is taken on the dais, it's not the signatures on the individual resolution, contract, etc., that determines the outcome on a particular item, which is voted upon. Legally binding is the vote, not the signature on the paperwork. I want to add Director Benno's comments in here. He's not here, but he did leave comments, so I want to make sure we address those comments. Director Benno asked if this was needed, and I let him know it's just clarification that the vote is legally binding, even if not every board member signs the document. Do you need this to be bigger?
Yes, please.
Yes. It will be very hard for us to read from that.
Is that big enough? Large enough for you to see? More?
I'm further away than most.
There you go.
There we go.
That's her, and she's her story and she's sticking to it.
I'm also wearing glasses.
Okay, so you can see that just in the second paragraph, we've just changed it to readopting in 2023. And then number 4, here is where that line is about the execution of documents, that the vote is a legally binding consensus, I should say.
And President Clark, if you would like, I would like to have legal counsel, Mr. Rockwell, to come up and just share a little bit about that portion, because I think that'd be helpful to the board.
It's kind of an expansion, is it not?
In a way it is, President Clark and members of the board, Superintendent Vella and Madam Clerk. It is an explanation of what will happen as a result of certain board members refusing to sign the document, which is our historic practice. It has happened in the past as a means of protest by one board member. And but we thought it was important for our policies to let board members know that doing that won't affect the legal nature of the vote, which is controlled under the OPMA and other statutes. So, and it's also important for our business partners who may have a contract that's voted on that one board member may see fit to object to in that way. So it's just a little house cleaning and a little publication about the legal effect of not signing that if you're one board member.
All right, if anybody has a question, will you raise your hand so I can visually pick you up? Leslie, do you have any?
Yes, I have a question. Because this has been an issue that I've seen while we were on the board and other boards, that they haven't signed the documents. Can you, Paul, explain that to me just a little bit more? I mean, I think I get it, but what does that mean to the individual board member beyond that statement? That they're just legally bound to it, but what, is there anything more behind that I don't understand?
No, I don't think so, Director Hamada. It is merely a statement that is sort of obvious, that if a board votes, the majority of the vote prevails, and normal voting rules are really what controls the board's singular action. It is not undermined by failure of one board member after that vote to sign a document, like a resolution or something like that. So, for example, if there's a bond resolution and one board member doesn't support the bond and they want to give their, have their say in protest, their failure to sign that document would not obstruct the resolution or the binding effect the resolution would have at the auditor's office.
And we're adding that just for clarity, and there's no other legal ramifications behind that, is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, you are correct.
All right, any other board members have a question or statement? All right, are we actually down to where we can vote to move this one on?
Okay.
All right, so without hearing further questions, I'm going to put it to the board. Do you agree with the revised protocol guidelines as has been outlined and discussed in tonight's meeting? All those in favor signify by raising your...
Wait,
Oh, it's first reading. I
This
mean,
is first
Yeah.
reading.
It's just his first reading.
I was like, wait.
Sorry.
Yeah,
I'm
we're not
sorry.
voting, yeah.
Oh,
well, I'm just trying to move it along.
I know.
I think what you're getting at,
I know, it's like, let's do this.
for the
Efficiency.
it looks like we have consensus.
Yeah.
And, and we're gonna come, and, that's what you're getting
Right,
at.
right.
Yeah.
We will go to the second reading for.
Yes.
We gotta,
Got it.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Howell.
You're welcome. Okay, we are on to 12:10, the annual organizational meeting. So a couple things about this. Let me put it up here a little better for you to see. This has been updated to reflect that the term of office is from December regular meeting to December regular meeting. We had some issues with clarity on that. This will finalize it in policy that that is the term of office. Also talks about the legislative representative position being every other year, so they hold the office for 2 years. And then I wanted to let you know that Director Benno asked about the reference to abstentions in the policy and said abstentions are not required, but they are okay to have, and that people can abstain from voting. You can't force someone to vote. It just means the vote will not be out of 5. He also asked about the statement, policies will continue from year to year and board to board until and unless the board changes them, and asked if that line was actually needed. I think WASDA just put that in there for general clarification for the public who may not be familiar with the process. We've highlighted this part of the sentence, and thus are not allowed for this specific action when we're talking about abstentions. We had that in there to talk about the legal conflict of interest being usually the only way an abstention takes place, but we wanted the board to have conversation around this. If this is something the board would like in the policy, or thoughts on that.
Paul, just for point of clarification, this becomes much more complex as soon as we don't have a board member present or participating, or if the position is vacant.
Right.
Could you explain that?
Yeah, there are a number of oddball votes that you end up taking that are controlled by separate statute and
Yeah.
procedure. And we've run into those in the past where you've had maybe one person missing, or they're off the dais, another person's gone, and all of a sudden you have a 2-0 vote or a 2-1 vote, or even a 1-0 vote through abstentions and people being gone. And what does that mean? And so we had run into the question of abstentions over the last year or so, and whether its use was appropriate. And we thought we could tee this up for discussion. Some cities and other agencies have their own abstentions rules in their rules of procedure that vary Robert's rules. Some say that they have to make a record of why they're abstaining. We follow the practice under the OPMA for abstentions, so it's a general rule. But you can make a rule. You can limit that if the board so chooses. You can also say, no, we're fine following Robert's rules, general guidance, and the OPMA, which we have been doing. So I'm not sure that scratches your itch.
Well, it does present a dilemma. One of the negative side effects is if we were down to 4 voting members and 2 of them abstain, they automatically kill the bill even though they didn't vote for or against it. And so the question becomes, are you defending your vote?
In some circumstances, it does require 3 out of 5. And in those cases, you're right, like for the appointment of a replacement, it requires a roll call and 3 out of 5, and that's in one of the statutes that it's in your paperwork. And if a couple people abstain, you won't be able to appoint anybody. Because there will be no, if you get less than 3 votes, because of there's 1 absence or 2 or an abstention, all of a sudden you can't take action. So it was worth bringing up because we ran into that a couple times last year or so.
I see a big question mark on Director Markell's face, so.
A couple different things. One, you cannot physically make somebody go up or down. End of story.
Right.
Right, I don't think that's the language we would propose. I certainly would, this was sort of a placeholder because.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree, and the prevailing literature on it at MRSC says the same thing, that you can't force somebody to vote a certain way or
No, because
at all.
they would just not come that night.
Right.
I mean,
But what you can do is fashion rules around the propriety of an abstention, and some of the cities have done that.
sure. So in here, I'm reading that this is this specifically about voting in a new board member, an interim position?
And
That they're-
superintendent.
Okay, so just in this circumstance, those 2 exclusive of anything else, that in that one vote, we say that you have to vote?
That's what that language says, but again,
That's what,
I'm not.
sorry, that's what I'm specifying in here. That's what that language is saying in here.
Exactly.
And that's tied to the RCW that's listed there, because that RCW says it's a roll call vote for either board member or superintendent. It's an actual roll call vote.
It's a weird, it's a bit of a
Very
weird deal.
weird, yeah.
But
Is there any other circumstances, do I hear you saying that's it, that occurs, right? Those 2?
I think that's it. That's it, and that's, we've reviewed our local rules that mirror that statute on the appointment of the superintendent, which is and the replacement of a board member. Those are the big ones. But you could have a rule, not that language, but you
Right.
could have a rule, for example, that narrows the availability of an abstention for those 2 instances, and we can bring that back to you if you want.
I think would be a good idea because, like we said, Director Margell said, we can't force someone
Right.
to vote yes or no.
Right.
And not, because that's their right to do that. I mean, I understand the thinking behind having, like hiring a superintendent or filling a board that is very crucial for the district to have. But to say in a general, no one can abstain a vote, it kind of,
Yeah,
doesn't, yeah.
it's a little over the top.
We can strike it.
Paul, does that include injunctions?
No,
I mean,
No, that does not include the initiation of lawsuits or other votes the board may take, just these two
yeah.
that we're aware of at this moment.
No, I mean,
Thank you.
I think it would be nice to clean it up and just like specifically say,
We can do a catch-all. We can say, for those votes that require 3 out of the 5.
right,
There needs to be a basis for an abstention that, have some factors to consider. And the board chair can deem that how he wishes or she wishes.
One other question, Paul, is this in the WASDA preferred language?
I don't think so.
That one line is not, no.
And why, does anybody have an idea why they haven't included that, or?
I don't know why they haven't included it. We put it in there simply to match the RCW as far as roll call vote. And Robert's Rules says that a roll call vote, that an abstention is not considered a vote one way or the other.
I will tell you, for just a practitioner in me, it is helpful to have this in our own books so we can look it up and find out what happens. Because we don't do that appointment very often. And or appointments for the board. So it's nice to have it there to remind us.
Yeah, and President Clark and members of the board, I'm thinking of some of the other conversations, discussions we have. WASDA does not, because WASDA has it in, doesn't mean that we would include it.
right.
In addition, I think Director Beno had said this before, we may be, we may include other language or vice versa. So
Yeah.
it's just that. And then the other clarification is back to Director Margill. Important to clarity is that these are the only two circumstances, if you will, and back to Vice President Farah, that were clear and clean that up.
Exactly, yeah.
And include that in there.
Yeah, there may be some benefit to limiting abstentions in these circumstances. You really want your board participating in.
And I really understand what you mean by, we had a couple of incidents last year where we had issues like that, and I get it. But what I would like to see is a more cleaner language so that it's clearly defined there so that we know exactly what that.
And I'm looking at the RCWs around this one, and maybe this is something I need to go and do a little more research on, but it does say that it has an oral call roll of all the members, and that no person shall be declared elected or selected unless he or she receives a majority vote of all the members on the board. But I'm not seeing in here where that says that you can't have an abstention.
Right. No, I agree with you.
It doesn't.
And so I guess then I was confused. I thought when you said that there was a roll call vote, that can't allow for an abstention?
No, I didn't say that. I don't think
Okay,
that's the
then
case.
I misunderstood what you said.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's the case, and it goes back to the idea that you can't force somebody
Yeah.
to vote or do something that,
Yeah.
But,
Okay.
as people are brought onto the board, they look at their rules, and it's nice to have that for new board members when those big moments come, like the appointment, to have an explanation. So we'll get you better language.
Yeah, I would, my opinion on this one more time is just following the RCW that says you have to have a majority yes, and either an abstention, a no, sitting there and saying nothing. It's not a yes. And what the RCW says is you have to have a yes.
Or an explanation. Is
It
that
does not say that in the RCW.
But is not the meaning?
I'm sorry, the explanation for
It-
the abstention?
Yeah,
Yeah, that is not, Director Margell's correct, that is not in the RCW, but other jurisdictions have that in their local ordinances.
Well, I think it's kind, and kind is always a good way to go, right? Because in the end, you need a superintendent.
Yeah, I mean, you need a board member.
Yeah. I mean, you got to figure out what's the issue so you can move on.
Absolutely.
Like, I get that.
Yeah.
But not, yeah.
I mean, I really get it, because the idea is to make sure that when we have a vacancy and we need to take a vote, everybody makes that vote.
Yep.
Instead of abstaining it and killing the idea of having someone sit at the seat or have a superintendent who can function.
Right.
But I just want to see more clean language.
In the end, it's really a matter of goodwill.
Right.
Even if you put factors around their abstention, they still may say, no, I'm not voting and I don't care. So
Right.
then you've got a censure issue or whatever.
Exactly.
It's
No,
just-
no, I don't think we
I
want to
mean,
go
you
down
can do
that.
anything, there's always
Absolutely, I agree.
But if it's published, I think
Sure.
Right.
reasonable people comply with the rules, and they always try to, so.
Sure.
All right, we'll put something together.
Okay.
Thank you.
And so we'll move this to a second reading at another policy work
Right,
session. This will not move on for vote
Right.
until we get it cleaned up.
Thank you, Ms.
Even President Clark's not going to have us move on for vote right now?
No, no?
Moving it on to 1.5 readings.
Okay.
Maybe we ought to wait just
I
a
know,
second.
I think it's a good idea to wait.
Okay, we are on to 1410. And this is executive or closed sessions. This has been updated to add information around talking about system vulnerabilities when we've had a data breach. Director Benno asked about this new language. It's language that's in RCW 42.30.110. And it's so if we have a data breach, it can be talked about in executive session without exposing our district vulnerabilities. So that's why this language was added.
I'm sorry, and his question was, why is it being added?
Yeah, he wondered about the new language, and it's just in reference to the RCW that has included this new language about security data breaches.
Right.
Okay.
And that was it.
And
That was
for-
it, I believe, his only question on that.
Clarification, it is WASDA language.
It's WASDA language, yes, and it mimics the RCW.
Got it.
Yep. Probably not a lot of questions on this one, I wouldn't think.
No.
Just another allowable reason for executive session.
I actually, Superintendent Bella, I'm looking under an executive session may be conducted for one or more of the following purposes, and then I jump down to I. And-
To I, let's see, let me put it in where there's no markup, so it's easier to
And
read.
the substitution of staff member for employee, and does that leave that open to,
Where's I? I don't see I.
I know.
It's in the red line, is it in the red line?
yeah, red
Yeah,
line.
it's in the red.
Okay, let me put
can
it
go
back in
back.
the markup.
I'm not seeing it.
I don't see it.
No, let's, no.
Is it I or one?
What does it start, what does the paragraph start with, President Clark?
All right, so it goes executive sessions, then an executive session may be conducted for one or more of the following purposes. And then it goes A, B, C on the first page, and then D, E, F, G.
Oh, to evaluate the qualifications?
Yeah,
Okay.
right. That's where I'm at.
It was just changed to staff member. I don't know if it's just a different way of WASDA.
Does that change a category of employee?
I don't think so, President Clark. I think what I've seen is the staff used more globally to cover all employees within an organization. That's what I've seen. So I would answer it that way, but I could double check though, now that you bring that up.
Yeah, if you would, please.
Yeah, I'll have Mr. Brockwell look into that piece specifically.
Okay.
Staff versus employee, does that change that? So,
You can bring it up at,
yeah,
That issue would be controlled by state law, so
Okay.
we'll just reference that and make sure.
and that's
Okay,
what I
okay,
want to make
okay,
sure
yeah.
you do.
okay.
Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Brockwell.
We good to move on?
Can we
No,
move
yeah,
on?
I mean, there's no
Questions?
difference in staff member or employee. Well, you're going into really deep.
Well, that's, as you well know,
Right,
paper
right.
trails count.
Yeah, we will
Absolutely.
see what state law does say.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, any other direction on this policy, or can I move that to 1.5?
1.5.
All right,
Next one is policy 1810, annual governance goals and objectives. Director Benno asked if, let me get this up here. He wanted to know if this was the strategic plan, and if it was, could one of the bullets be about that? And this is not, it's separate from the strategic plan. WASDA updated this just to expand on vision, structure, accountability, and advocacy. They listed the different A through E, and this is to ensure student success, and it's also known as the Washington School Board Standards. We also talk about the board conducting self-assessment and engaging in board development activities. This was added to the policy as well.
okay. Anybody have a input on this one?
Well, we need to be doing that,
Yeah.
you know. So in 2023, 2024, we should be doing that.
I mean, don't we do
Well,
this?
We
We
should have
should-
done it, you know, around February, yep.
Yeah, I think I mean, we
That's
responsible.
for the president and vice president to kind of work together to bring that to the board, and then the board members to suggest things on that. And also, we should have done the self-analysis or board from WASDA like we've done in the past. And we also don't, as a board, have a communication plan, which we're supposed to have.
Are we okay?
Yeah, I just reading the changes, it seems like it very much changed the whole purpose of this one. In the past, it was the superintendent reported on the degree by which the superintendent had met the goals and objectives, but now it's the board saying, so it feels weird to me that we're completely changing the purpose of a governance policy instead of retiring one policy and making another, when the entire responsible party and who is talking about their successor opportunities. I don't know, am I the only one who's seeing that? Am I wrong in this?
Well, if I can, my particular reading in this, although it says function of the board, the reality is the evaluation of the superintendent is intended to be an active process. And so the question of whether in fact the superintendent is fulfilling his role as required by an approved plan that we have adopted, then does in fact put the burden back on the board. Is the district going where it's supposed to be going? And that would leave it back at governance for us, as opposed to operations.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if I may, that I think that where WASDA was coming from here is that looking at the language previously really reads as if it's an operation where the superintendent, the board governance is really the one who's guiding, and which we've done, by the way, in setting the goals and working together in that. However, when it comes to, I think the second, at the conclusion of the year, the board will reflect on the degree. And how do you do that? My team comes to you from the operational standpoint, like we did last year, and said, here's how we were following through on the goals for the year, whether it be strategic initiatives, priorities, whatever they might be. That's the way I read this, similar to President Clark's. This is board responsibilities policy, including direction of the, and success of students, including the goals.
And I'm just going to throw in an observation. I think that that was one of the struggles of the previous boards in their dealing with Superintendent Watts. They didn't have in place a really professionally graded plan of how to run the district. And so it left it simply in the hands of the board of, how are we going forward? And since there were a number of fiscal problems, that became difficult because there were several things that could not be, well, that's how your HR department got dysfunctional, and because you cut so many people out of it. And it throws it back into the board has oversight in terms of what is going on in the district. And the responsibility of that is to obviously have an agreed-upon plan with the superintendent and staff that figures in behind that. So when you go to read it, I believe, again, that it basically assumes that you have a working evaluation system for the superintendent, and that attempts to correct course are involved in that when it comes time for renewal of contract.
President Clark, we did, when I came in 2020 and was president in 2022, we did write separate board goals. I didn't quite understand the function of that, but I was directed by the other residents of the board that the board had to have a separate board policies and evaluation of the board. I think they were to be tied really with a really good evaluation system and strategic planning system, but I don't think that was coordinated well. But I think this is a whole separate deal, but they should work together. And it's important, right around in February, where we come up with a board plan. We were supposed to also have a board communication plan, and I didn't quite understand all that, but I think we need to work to do better in all of that.
No argument.
No, I appreciate that. I just do feel like there's a change of intent on this one. And for some reason that sits with me differently, of making it this policy as a revision when it's really kind of, it feels to me like it's changing its intent. Anyway, one question on that one. And then also, so if I'm reading this right, what this is saying is the board has set a strategic vision. We choose a superintendent to work with administration and faculty to enact. The results of that then are evaluated by so if the vision was set perfectly, but still not fulfilled, where was the disconnect there? And maybe that's in the guiding along, or possibly great things happened, maybe we still didn't have a very clear vision. I mean, is that the intent that we're seeing on this one?
Yeah, I think I'd go back to governance and the board's roles around governance related to this specific policy, annual governance of goals and objectives. So if you look at those bullet points that are there, what I see there overall from a big picture, the board's still setting that governance around that. Now, when we started the process for goal setting, that was really what we were doing together as a board superintendent's governance team, but it was the board setting those pieces. Now, where we are is, by the way, we have our timeline set for where my team will be coming back to the board to share how we're doing related to the governance of goals and objectives. So, yeah. So we'll keep working on this, but I think it's headed in the right direction in terms of governance and the board's role.
Yeah, and I'm just going to speak from my previous experience on the board. The evaluation system that was employed on the superintendent was a many-page document, and it was taken off of national standards that other districts had employed, so that when it came down to asking the question, how do we evaluate the superintendent in terms of communication with the public, that was not a simple question. There were subsets underneath that went along with that. So it was, well, it's the way it's supposed to be. It's a public agency, we are overseeing a huge expenditure of public funds, and there has to be accountability in the system. And the board has responsibility to see that, in fact, there is oversight. So it does tie into the superintendent's evaluation, but that goes back to goals set for the superintendent, and it has to have a system of adjustment based on circumstance. I mean, the superintendent can be undercut by a sudden departure in state law and the inability to do what we've been doing. And so the board is, should reasonably adjust accordingly, so.
I know the self-assessment part. Sorry, go ahead.
I have said this previously, President Clark, and to the entire board, and to Dr. Nyland, and to Superintendent Villa, that this evaluation process was totally different and totally well done this time. So we are on track on that part of it.
All right.
And that is that's the responsible school district governance. Again, to my point though, it's the last paragraph is, what it's saying though is then the board needs to then evaluate how the board did at evaluating all of those things, which is just different from what it said before.
Yeah, it is. I get it, Megan, you're right.
Yeah, it's how the board worked together to govern the process of evaluating goals and objectives of the district.
Well, and if I'm not mistaken, isn't there another resolution that actually deals with self-evaluation of the board?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
self-assessment, right there.
Yeah.
It's the cross-referenced. And the way I understood this policy was how, as a board, we are gonna be doing our work, and what are the things that we should be doing our work. And, for example, engaging the community, the education. And to have that ability to look back and see where are the, things that we did and didn't do, and what are the learned lessons, so that we can continuously improve. That's how I understood this, self-assessment part of it.
And I'd add that I think we call it championing. The championing the board's doing is really doing it as a whole. Now you've divided out your work, and I think that's part of the governance part. Even though the operations is done by the superintendent, there's still a process that we went through, and that's why I'm really proud of the process we went through.
Right.
I think we're actually, to your point, Director Amata, aligned now to what the new language says better than we've ever been before.
Right.
So I that's how I understood. And yeah, for me, that is,
Okay.
All right, are we comfortable with this? Objections? Going once, going twice. Move it to 1.5.
it's right on.
Okay, we have one left. Actually, do we have one left? We have, and it's in relation to this. It is 1822, Training and Professional Development for Board Members. And this policy notes the two areas of training that are required for board members. One is open government training, and the second is cultural competency, equity, diversity, and inclusion training. You don't see it here in the policy, but WASDA has links where training, can be had. It also talks about the board, that we will include in our budget for training for board members.
And Ms. Holly, just try again for clarification, this all is WASDA language?
Everything that's in there is WASDA language, yes.
I know it's WASDA language, but if anybody could maybe enlighten me on why continuing education and professional development, why education is being struck.
Oh, let's see, where are you on that? I'm sorry, Director Miguel.
First paragraph.
I'll be honest, I don't know why. I'm thinking they're just emphasizing professional development, even though, we can certainly leave education, continuing education and professional development in there.
Good question.
That's a very good question, yeah. Well, yeah, maybe it's because they're looking at it in a sense of just saying professional development instead of education.
Ms. Holly, one question I had on that, because I've taken both of those, one through PSED and one through just the WASDA thing. Am I correct in understanding that every 2 years we have to do that? Not just once or something?
I think for new board members, the training must take place, and then I think it's for every new election. So let me just double check. I recall reading that.
Because I was looking for that to see if I need to renew those again.
If the director is appointed or elected to a first term of office, the director must complete governance training requirements within 2 years of appointment or certification of the election in which they were elected.
Okay. Oh, that's right. It's not every 2 years, you just have to.
No, just within 2 years of being elected.
And then you need refresher training every 4 years
Is that down further?
on open government training.
There we go, yeah. That's within 90 days after taking office.
Yep, just to clarify, the open government training is 90 days,
Yes,
and then every 4.
or
and,
the,
within 2 years for cultural competency, equity, diversity, and inclusion.
yes, within 2 years. And then that doesn't have to be repeated, but has to be taken within 2 years. And I'm sure the open government training, the intervals of no more than 4 years is because the Open Public Meetings Act can have revisions to it, as we've had recently.
I get that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And to Director Margell, I think, trying to figure out back to your after reading it and perusing it, I'm wonder if the reason they struck that, I'm not saying it's a good reason, is that they're strictly, at least the way I'm reading it, strictly looking at professional development after a board member takes office or is appointed or however they're elected. Which, again, I don't necessarily agree to strike education, because each board member is going to come with different experiences, whether it's whoever calls it education, they may not come with, quote, a degree, but may come with education. See, yeah, so I'm trying to understand it myself.
Yep. And so then my second question on that one is, and I think, Ms. Holly, you touched on this, is open government training changes enough that it's, that we need to look at it every 4 years. And while I don't think that change might not be the right word, But I think it's important enough in our district, and I think to those on this dais, that cultural competency, equity, diversity, inclusion training, I don't think it should be a check mark one and done.
Right, I agree.
And so as a board, I think it might be something that we look at for ourselves, putting a requirement to have it at least as often as open government training.
Every night. Every,
The openness for you. right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate you saying that. I think that, back to what we've been talking about, not always does WASDA have everything that we feel we need,
Yeah.
but our board should be able to,
Right.
you know, discuss what should be there, particularly in the Kent School District, which is one of the most diverse school districts in the country.
Yeah.
Director Margell, the first line talks about the board of directors shall complete a governance training program once per term of elected office. That's under cultural competency, so that would be every 4 years.
But we could clarify, though,
We can certainly,
some language there.
update the language to reflect that.
Sound good?
Sound good.
Okay.
Further input on this particular document? Further input? Well,
That concludes.
Thank you,
Policy
Ms.
work
Holland,
session.
And I'll go over to President Clark to
any further comments? With that, we are adjourned at 6:55.
great job. Nice job.